Thanks, Rob. And I hope you're all not feeling too sensitive this morning. As Rob said, my name's Steve Storey. I'm the Shipping and Salvage Engagement Manager at OSRL. And our talk this morning is about future fuels and response challenges. And we'd like this to be as interactive as we can possibly have it. So if you guys have got any questions at all or any comments, please feel free to raise your hand. Rob will come round with a roving microphone and go from there. But it's a really informal discussion. There's no slides, there's no PowerPoint presentation. It's just trying to get a feel for what we all think about the future fuels and the response challenges. So we've got a distinguished panel today to my right that represent P&I Insurance, technical advisory from the ITAC side of life, salvage from a maritime side of life, and also from industry. So we've tried to sort of give 4 different areas of expertise to bring with it. So the first in the panel is Daisy Roach. Daisy is a senior secretariat executive at the International Group of P&I Clubs, which she joined in August 23. Her main role is to assist the group's pollution and claims cooperation committees. This involves liaising with the IMO, IOPC funds on policies affecting the IG, as well as a wide range of outreach activities with key partners, governments and liabilities. Prior to this role, Daisy was head of legal at the Ship Owners Club, where she worked for nearly a decade in both the claims and legal departments. Outside of work, Daisy is an active advocate in the diversity and inclusion sphere and is part of the Maritime UK's Diversity and Maritime Task Force. Welcome, Daisy. Next to Daisy, we have Richard Johnson. I'm sure a lot of you are aware of Richard. Richard is the technical director at ITOP. He's a marine biologist with a higher degree in radiation and environmental protection, having worked as an environmental consultant with both small independent and subsequently large international company.
Not talking about nuclear fuels.
No. Well, we may be. Richard joined ITOP in 1994. His ITOP career has seen him progress through all technical positions, becoming technical director in 2009. Welcome, Richard, and thank you for being here. Next to Richard, we have Oliver Timofey. Oliver is the founder and the director of BlueTAC. BlueTAC was formed by 3 former members of Ardent, the salvage company that was dissolved back in 2020. Thank you. Oliver is one of the founders of BlueTAC, a marine salvage company focused on incident management and pollution remediation. With over 18 years of work experience in the industry, Oliver worked for Weissmuller, Spitzer and Ardent in different managerial roles globally. He has been involved in all aspects of salvage, working with ship owners, oil majors, insurers and government bodies, both on the risk mitigation side and actual emergency response stroke salvage. Oliver studies as a maritime officer and holds a degree in maritime management. Welcome, Oliver. And finally, next to Oliver, we have Adam Sanders. Adam is the LNG business development side of STS Marine Solutions. He has an engineering background, has been involved in LNG for over 10 years in various roles, from head of technical to LNG superintendent and terminal manager. Is highly experienced in STS operations and STS system selections, maintenance and operations, as well as project management. So welcome to Adam. So as I said before, it's planned as really a very informal kind of discussion about what we all see as the challenges, and I'm sure you guys all have views on it as well. So I think, given that given the likelihood that there will probably be more than one single choice of fuel, where do we start? Who does what? Who educates who? Is it industry educating technology, or technology educating industry? So who does what and who leads? Richard, would you like to pick that up as the technical advisory side of life?
Well, I guess there are lessons to be learned in as far as, with IMO 2020, when we went to low sulfur fuel oil. It solved one problem, but on the response side, maybe we weren't completely sure of the fate, behaviour and effects of that less than orthodox fuel. So we need to work hand in hand so that we don't solve one problem and then create another. So you're absolutely right that we need to be talking to one another. There's lots of different fuels out there at the minute. There's the transition fuels, there's the biofuels, there's the LNG, we're going through ammonia, hydrogen, methanol, and the nuclear option. So it's always difficult to know where to pitch things because there's so many different streams going on. So I think all of us at the moment, we have to be knowledgeable about all of those things. So I can just say a little bit about what we're doing. So we have a H&S internal technical working group, which we've had for a long time because we've been dealing with cargo spills other than oil for decades now. I remember in Interspill 2009, we were saying, is a H&S spill more dangerous than an oil spill? So we've been looking at this for a number of years as cargo, and now it's trying to transfer that knowledge into bunker incidents. So you can't do that alone. There's various working groups. So one of the clubs, and I'm sure Daisy will talk to this, has an alternative fuels advisory panel. And the IG actually have a working group on the matter looking at the conventions. So within those groups, it's engine manufacturers, it's maritime educational institutes, it's owners, it's cargo people and responders or technical people like ITAC. So we all have to come together as we go around the world doing our preparedness activities and talking about contingency plans. It's making people aware that the risk profile is changing. So it's no good just being geared up for fossil fuel bunker spills now. It's coming, and it's not just 2050 that we're looking at. There are milestones that we have to hit before then. So it's coming quicker than you might think. So yeah, get your chemistry heads on for those who aren't that way inclined. Who leads who? Well, I think let's have this discussion and see, because there are people who are going to be, salvos who are going to be right at the cutting edge of that before ITOP come with the response, looking after human safety and the ship side of it with these new fuels. So yeah, that's my starter for 10.
Thank you. Oliver, do you want to pick up?
Yeah, no, of course. So I'll try. I hope this is better. So from a salvage side of things, I think the main focus from us goes down to trying to be prepared, right? And that goes both ways. It's for ourselves to understand the systems, seeing what we can face. On the other hand, you have the client base, and we're trying to create, let's say, projects or assessments to get to a point whereby, on one hand, we have the client base, ship owners, insurers, who we work for, of course, and then ourselves being prepared for potential incidents related to whereby you have the alternative to the new fuels on board. Conclusion right now is, from a salvage side, we are not prepared, not at all. We're still facing actually challenges of LNG being a fuel, having the right equipment, the right knowledge to do what we need to do. And now, of course, you have a mix coming up of ammonia and methanol, etc. But by right now, it's generally next to LNG, ammonia, and methanol that we are focusing on as the basis. But besides ourselves being prepared, of course, when you have an incident, you need to run permits, you need a port of refuge, you need to come up with actual solutions. And also from their side, we just see that we are all together, all the responders all together, including the marine authorities, etc. We're lagging, let's say, speed and focus to get where we want to be. So that's where we are, in a sense. What we have been doing over time is been doing assessments with ship owners on understanding their systems, and that they wanted us to, let's say, pre-approve their systems from a salvage side, meaning if there would be a casualty and you need to take the LNG or the ammonia off, what can be done. And we've actually seen quite some staggering conclusions whereby actually getting fuel off in a way that sometimes needs to be done for a casualty, that's actually not even possible. So you could actually see that the ferocious speed of implementation of the new fuels actually neglects response readiness from a shipping side of things. So that's what we need to grasp and speed up with from the responder side, but of course also from the other stakeholders.
Sure. Okay. So going back to your point about as a salvor, you're already sort of head in a muddle with kind of how you would remove that fuel. So does that start right? Does response actually start back on the drawing board? Does it start right back at the beginning before the vessel's even commissioned or even start to have its keel laid? Does that start right back then? And is there that sort of interaction going on between the industries and it goes through insurance, through to technical advice, through to the actual sharp end as well? Is there that those conversations, are they already taking place, or is it something that would be a nice to have?
Yeah, from my side, at least from a salvage side of things, it's very voluntary focused. So you see ship owners or insurers, but if you look at the ship owner side of things, you have ship owners like in the cruise industry, etc. They're very proactive and they want to be prepared for incidents. A lot has to do, of course, because in the cruise industry, with the cruise market being so big and financially so strong, that if there would be a casualty and there's no solution, then the cruise industry as a whole will be damaged. So they're looking very much at seeing, from the drawing board, indeed, when they're creating or drawing their ships and looking at the fuel systems, is it salvage friendly? Is there a solution in place? So that's really good, but that's all voluntary focused. With other shipping liners or operators, it's like highly, or we see already that's different, right? They're just looking at financial gains and just want to get it implemented, and that's already a headache in itself because of the speed and the emergency response with salvage. Yeah, let's talk about that later. That's up to the salvers to solve, so to say.
Yeah. Okay. Adam, from your side, from the sharp end.
I think it's exactly what Liv just said there. It's the willingness to invest in the solutions for the salver. And from our point of view, from the salvage side, from my input, we focus on STS operations and lightering the cargo without fuel or cargo from the vessels. So obviously looking at LNG, from my background, there's a lot of equipment involved in that. There's a lot of maneuverability, logistics, etc., etc. As we run down this road down towards 2050 with the change of the IMO regulations, everyone seems to quickly going towards that without looking back of how we can lighter this in the need of a salver preparation. And I've been talking to Oliver for the last few days now about, yesterday and today, about things and the worry and things that have been said about how we get this cargo off and the limited getting this cargo off. Ammonia is especially, there's such a toxic cargo compared to the LNGs and the LPGs. LPGs, well, a little bit more toxic, all the oils we use now. What is the focus on the salvage opportunities there to get them off for the safety of the vessel, or is it just let it sit there and kind of burn away? And from our point of view, one of the questions I was asking, talking about earlier, is what volumes we're talking here. Are we talking bunkering volumes? Are we talking cargo volumes? And what that is, then will help us as a solutions provider help with a response to potential incidents based upon the volumes. Very small volumes, very small hose requirements, very big volumes, big hose requirements. It's the high level sort of simplistic view of this. So the industry has not quite made that decision where it's going to go in terms of the volumes of fuel and cargoes involved in these potential incidents as such. So
I suppose it goes back to the original question that who leads, who leads, who follows, doesn't it?
So yeah, it's a very good point. So we can follow or we can lead. But then if we lead, we put restrictions by how we lead. But if we follow, there might be restrictions based on what's been led. It's got to be hand in hand.
Well, then going back to your point, it's about the investment as well, isn't it? So if you lead, for example, then you're the investors in that.
Yeah.
And should you be, or should it be the industry that's doing that, i.e. regulators that's doing that, or who should it be?
Incentivizing readiness for a problem is how that's incentivized, which is difficult to do.
Sure.
As we know, we can ship in and everything pennies and pounds and dollars and dimes. It's not like it used to be where there's a bit more free market on things. Shipping is very much dollars and dimes and pennies and pounds. So how do you incentivize that? How do you manage that with the ship owners? And the mentality sometimes appears to be it's always been that way. Never an instance, so we'll be okay. But we've never been on this route now with the new fuels and the future fuels. Can we get ahead of that bus before it hits us? Essentially, is a good start point as such.
Okay, and Daisy.
Thanks. It's quite interesting actually hearing you guys talk about it from your end, because I was sitting here thinking about IMO 2020 and actually a huge amount of owners were not prepared until very much the last minute. So I was thinking, we've got what many owners will be very long-term targets in relation to greenhouse gas emissions. And I'm not sure that there are certain sectors of the industry where they are very proactive already. I mean, you've mentioned North Standard, one of the group clubs within the international group. Their members have been very proactive in exploring this, but within the international group, we insure 90% of the world's ocean-going tonnage. As you can imagine, there's a big variance in the ownership within that, and there'll be many members, I think, within that who aren't even considering this. We're all sitting here talking about it. They'll be very happy continuing as is for the foreseeable. So I think the international group certainly sees its role as starting those discussions, raising that awareness. We have a working group now, which ITAC is part of, and other stakeholders. I think one of the first steps, and it sounds very simple, but is literally mapping out the liabilities and damages that are likely to flow from vessels that are powered by alternative fuels. Everyone is very familiar with what happens when you're dealing with hydrocarbon oil, but they're very different kind of factors with some of these fuels. And what that means for us as insurers, basically, there is very, very high levels of cover within the international group that would respond to an incident. But the major thing for us is that there isn't international conventions, liability conventions underpinning those. The HNS convention is not yet in force, although France ratified that, I think it was earlier in the week. But there's nothing in the Bunkers Convention that would address spill relating to alternative fuel. And that would be, it would be something that would be good for the IMO, hopefully in the future, to address, because when we see kind of uniform application of liability and conventions, it tends to be much more beneficial in the event we do have an incident as well. At the moment, we'd be dealing with a patchwork of whatever local legislation or regulations are in force. So yeah, lots of things to consider.
Lots to do, lots to think about.
Sorry. Just taking your point there about bunkering and a bunkering spill, it's probably we've probably focused on more of a large scale response. When you're talking about ammonias and hydrogens and LNG as a transition fuel, a bunkering spill of a certain volume could cause structural damage to your vessel, which puts you straight into a salvage situation potentially. And it's maybe not something we've talked about amongst ourselves this morning, not something to mention that we've really considered. And it comes along with the bunkering conventions of how it's managed, and looking at bunkering for LNG, for example, just to give you an idea, there's no one standard configuration of a manifold. So when you look at the cruise ships industry, for example, sometimes you've got a lifeboat 50 feet above your bunkering station. Now, if that was to have a release, you've now got a free fall incident of that, which then puts a bunker vessel and a cruise ship potentially in a salvage situation. So there's that point of it as well. Maybe going back a little bit from where we are, is towards the training and the legislation on how a bunker manifold looks and how it actually looks for transferring this cargo from vessel to vessel. What are the regulations? Gone are the days when we used to get an old bunker barge and it just tied two rubber hoses still. We're now into systems and all these sort of things. Who's leading that standard for salvage side to come on the back off? Because like you say, with an LNG spill or an ammonia spill, or especially onto hydrogens, the incident could be massive very quickly. On that side of things, you're going straight into a salvage before you've actually got the cargo on board the vessel.
But then, based upon that, is a salvage even possible?
Yeah, well, that's of course you don't want to say that, because a responder needs to respond, right?
Is it actually even possible if you've got a vessel that's it's compromised?
Yeah, I think what we're getting at, and that's of course not nice to say, but it's the speed for the decarbonization of the new fuels, the new cargoes on top of it. We are still facing container fires, right? That's still an issue out there. Right now, you have container vessels, 18,000 plus TEU, who are LNG propulsed with an atmospheric LNG fuel system. We're already happy if we can actually, or all the salvors are happy if they're able to, let's say, mitigate the fire in the container vessel. With conventional fuel, that's a less added risk, because we know how it works, we have the equipment, we have the knowledge, etc. But now you have LNG as a fuel, and if that gets unstable on top of the fire on the containers, that's already a big issue for us. Right now, you have car carriers with electrical vehicles on board. We're not there yet that we know that we have a firefighting solution for electrical vehicles. whereby those car carriers have again an LNG, in the future likely ammonia, methanol fuels, because the car makers want everything to be zero carbon, so to say. So it's an added complexity. So it's a plus you're getting at. Besides the fact that, if such an incident would happen somewhere in the Atlantic, you're, let's say, more comfortable than if it happens in the North Sea or somewhere where it's very
Or in Port
dense.
Southampton.
Yeah, exactly. So it's an added complexity that we're getting at. And of course, there are scenarios whereby, as a responder, you actually have to say it's too dangerous to go there. Also on the LNG side, LNG cargo, there are scenarios there whereby you actually want to have an exclusion zone and stay away. That's really at the most severe situation. If it goes down to a car carrier, for example, with EVs on fire, and you have a fuel system whereby it's not stable, then there could be scenarios whereby actually it's best to stay away instead of reboard it. Because if you want to have a towage connection, if you want to control a vessel which is on fire adrift, you still need to put people on board. That's 80% still the case. Is it safe enough to put people on board of such a casualty? On the recent Fremantle Highway electrical vehicle fire case, it took days actually to get a towage connection in place because it was just too dangerous to reboard a car carrier adrift on fire. Yeah.
And I suppose your point's well made about electrical vehicles and transporting them. You know, it goes back to 2020. You know, the fuel source comes in, the cars come in, the EVs come in, but nobody's thought about actually how do you transport them and how do you respond then to a casualty, especially if it's a car carrier, or even worse if it's a car ferry. You know, and you've got a lot of passengers on board as well. And this is travelling down the same route as I see it. We're sort of heading towards 2050, and there's nothing in the background that's supporting it, or educating, or where's that education come from? Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I've only researched what I've researched, but, you know, is there anybody that's taken a responsibility for that educational part? And as such, where are they driving?
Hang on a sec. Name and affiliation, please.
Mark Orr, UK and Ireland Spill Association. Oliver has done gave a webinar with Marcus Russell on alternative fuels, and the feedback from that was quite surprising. We also did one on the inland side, which was done by Adrian Allen and several other of our members. I mean, and we've been engaging with government and regulators about preparedness for this. I mean, the truth from our perspective, and this is from a trade association of spill responders, there is no preparation. There's been very, very little, almost no preparation for the risks which have arrived on our doorstep. We formed an emerging and future risk working group which we chair on behalf of the Environment Agency, which is bringing together all regulators in the United Kingdom and to try to look at some of these problems. So we've dealt with HVO. We're now onto lithium-ion batteries, but the reaction from government generally and the regulators is very splintered and fractured. So there's guidance which is being produced, but the guidance is very conflicting. Not the MCA have produced a document which is bespoke to vessels and is a good start point. But there's guidance coming out from trade associations, there's guidance coming out from interested parties, often with a commercial interest attached. But it is so fractured and so splintered that actually you can't take a common thread through everything. And with electric vehicles, you know, you have the situation where, you know, you have a forecourt. There is a marketing-led drive to adopt electric. So you have forecourts which have got petrol on them, and you have cars filling up with petrol, but actually within what used to be the hazardous zone, you've got electric vehicles charging, and you've now got tanker drivers who are refusing to deliver to forecourts unless the whole forecourt is closed because they're aware of the risks. Now, a lot of these things are occurring because they are market-led. On the shipping side, what seems to happen from the outside is that this drive to go green is owner-led. because they're stakeholders within their businesses. They're saying, you've got to go green, you've got to drive ahead. And so you have a plethora of vessels which are arriving in the shores of Europe, for which the ports themselves are very ill prepared.
Mhm.
And we have methanol being brought came from Rotterdam to fill a container vessel in Felixstowe recently, which is barking mad. But there isn't. But we haven't got ahead of the game in delivering the facilities which the ships will come, which the ships require when they come, which is why that incident happened. But we haven't even thought about the type of facilities that these boats need.
Sure.
So at the moment, you've got the shipping is changing much faster, I think, than people recognise. Much faster. I think that's a fair thing to say. But we're ill prepared for it. The thing is, we have to catch up. There's two reasons why in the why any country has to catch up is because soon, if you aren't prepared, the ships won't be able to come. So you're going to lose that trade, which is not good. But equally, you're ill prepared for the risk that they present when they become a casualty. And the consequence of them becoming a casualty is not just local to that vessel. It's a significant risk.
Mhm.
They could, some of these vessels could easily explode with significant loss of life.
For sure.
And if they're in coastal waters, there'll be considerable loss of life plus considerable pollution. But we're ill prepared. Now, I do wonder, all these vessels are classified by a classification body of some sort. Now, and I don't know what influence our industry has on the classification society, which is classified. And I think maybe we have to start there, because they're ultimately classifying those vessels as being structurally sound and all the rest of it. But surely somewhere in that must come, if there is a grounding or an accident, there must be in that classification society some thought of how do we manage the risk when shit happens.
Yeah, and so I think you sort of answered.
Because it will happen.
And this
shit
is exactly
gonna
what we've
happen.
said. Yeah.
And unfortunately, poor guys like Oliver are sort of right in the firing line.
Well, we spoke about the Gulf of Mexico earlier on. That was never going to happen. And then it happened, and then everybody ran to the pumps. Well, so I put it really to the panel and to the audience. So who drives this? Who actually drives it forward? Who takes ownership of it and pushes it forward?
Just one thing, Steve. Sorry to jump in. I think one of the things that you said there, during talking there, you mentioned ammonia, methanol, EV. We've talked about LNG. We talked about transition fuels. With all of these, there's so many fronts of attack at the moment that we see as incidents and issues. What is the industry drive towards? Which one is going to be the thing? So it's quite an interesting question. Say we've got to catch up, but catch on which one?
Mm-hmm.
Who's the industry leader in ammonia? You can't have an expert in everything. You've got to have a jack of all trades rather than a master of one. You're trying to find the right people in the room to influence the decisions on the various different fuels. I think as a forum, is it too generic at the moment, and people trying to attack all the fuels rather than looking at each one individually?
Do you want to just go with Rob? Thank
Okay.
you.
Hi, Brian Mitchell from Merrill Consulting. Back in the last century, I interacted a lot with CARB, and CARB is the California Air Resources Board. And what the CARB decides today happens in New York next year and in Europe the year after. And what they wanted to do was introduce methanol in buses, school buses. And the big problem was that when the bus has an accident and goes on fire, you don't see the flames. There's no smoke. The firemen rush in, they get burned alive. And their solution was to market M85, which was 85% methanol and 15% gasoline, just because there could be an accident. And that was driven by the regulator, CARB, essentially right from the beginning. And I think it's very interesting that this whole question, who is the regulator on all these fuels? Because they were, they were acting ahead of the game. And here it just seems to be everybody panic about the climate change. Let's change.
Yeah, but they went backwards to go forwards.
Yes.
So it wasn't in place before. It had to something had to happen, or someone had to think about it before someone reacted to it. So it's back to no one actually put the regulations in place. It came into force, and then we reacted to it. Rob, thank you.
So I have one observation and a question. I'm Maria Hartley with Chevron and also chair for the IPICA Marine Spill Group. So I'll start with the observation. We had a meeting recently where in the US, I think, I don't know if Tim Stefik is here, API. And what we were told is that oftentimes we neglect educating the responders. So, we're all thinking about all the things, all the potential challenges we might have, but we don't know, we've not actually kind of reached out to the local firefighters. And so I'll give you an example, and this was around carbon dioxide, that, we have pipelines now which are being used to move carbon. And firefighters didn't know that there was an incident, and they were like, we didn't know the industry was doing this. So we didn't know, we weren't prepared, we hadn't got any education, we didn't have any equipment, we had no training. And so there's all these new things, but also I'm not sure if we're kind of reaching out to the local communities in terms of, if there is an incident with any of these, that people have the education, even if it's in a port. So that was an observation, and I think there's also potential relevance to the discussion we're having. The second, and this is the question part, is there any central repository in terms of what is being shipped right now, or what are the key concerns that we should be having? We're talking about change. There's huge change in terms of what's powering these vessels, but also their cargo. Is there anything that we can monitor? Is there any work being done in terms of what's a future analysis? What should we be looking at for the future? What should we be preparing for education or training or other things?
Thank you, Maria. Richard, you were going to pick up on a point that Adam made.
Yeah, and I think it was really, it's driven by regulation, obviously.
Yeah.
And society demands this, and so the regulations come in. And then we touched upon it, it's commercialization.
Mm-hmm.
So even if we think of something completely off topic, but nurdles, plastic pellets, where should they be carried on a ship? How should they be carried?
Yeah.
And commercially, you put them, they're light, and so above deck and to the wings. But if you're trying to prevent a spill, you put them below deck, low and in the center. So you put them in one place for response, but commercially maybe it doesn't make sense. And similarly, how you would carry them in bags in the containers. So yeah, who runs what? And certainly there's other aspects to this. I mean, Maria was talking about different cargoes as well. But the way the conversation is going here, I mean, clearly human health is potentially at greater risk here than marine pollution and the environment, which is something that we generally concentrate on with fossil fuels, orthodox hydrocarbons. So we're looking at affecting populations, port structures, ship structures, safety to salvors and how we respond. So ITAC come along for, we're talking about dispersants, skimmers, booms, contaminants in the water. These are volatiles. These are invisible. Some are miscible. Okay, some are corrosive. Some are toxic to the marine environment, but many of them aren't as persistent. So from ITAC's point of view, you've got to know the fate and behaviour, know your enemy. Mm-hmm. You've got to know the fate and behaviour and effect. But we've got these other steps in front of that, which is very clear. Pollution control is stop the source, which solvers are very often at the front end of that.
Daisy.
Just on your point on data specifically, it's a hot topic of conversation within the international group, because when you've got 90% of the world's fleet, everyone thinks you've got all the data at your fingertips. Which is, I have to be honest, not the case. In terms of what data is probably more easily extractable, I think it would be possible to identify the proportion of that 90% of the ocean-going fleet that are now propelled by alternative fuel. That wouldn't be too difficult to extract. What's more difficult is the cargo side of it, where you're looking at, we don't track those kind of things, just because the sheer amount of voyages that are undertaken, it would be impossible for us to do it. But we would be able to pull out and extract data in relation to the incidents that have occurred where you've got hazardous cargo being carried. And we did extract data relating to the H&S convention, which we supplied, I think, to the IMO a few years back, which I'm not entirely sure what they did with it, but that's probably about as granular as we could get, though. So it just kind of demonstrates, even within an organisation with that amount of vessels, and what you would think is easily accessible information probably is not that easy.
Thanks, Daisy. MCA, sorry, I'm going to jump on you, but not in a nasty way. And just want, and if you can't answer, you can't answer. But where would you pin your money? Where do you, what would you do, you guys, in the event of? Because ultimately, if it was in Southampton water here, for example, it would come pretty much directly to you chaps as well. So please don't feel I'm pressing you into an answer. I'm not. But it'd be interesting to get some sort of point of view from where you think you would stand, or where you would stand, and where SOSREP would even stand. Because if you talk about port of refuge, would they really allow that back into Southampton, or what would they do with the thing? You know,
Hazel Christie, MCA. It's a very big question. I don't have a sort of an answer, but it's interesting that you say about what can be done in terms of trend analysis about propulsion and things. Because I sort of had made that assumption that it would be quite easy to extract the data and have a more targeted approach, but I don't know really. I think incidents drive regulations quite a lot of the time,
absolutely,
which would then feed industry. But yeah,
so the wrong way round yet again. We sort of follow our way, don't we?
I don't know if Jamie's.
Thanks, Hazel. Sorry for jumping on you.
Sure. Hello, Jamie Gathercole, MCA, Hazel's colleague. You mentioned regulation and what is in place or what is not. So, for example, that barge that came into Felixstowe when they were bunkering in there, currently we regulate for ship-to-ship transfer of hydrocarbon, and that's it. And we have been asked as the MCA, where a provider who wants to facilitate a ship-to-ship transfer of LNG, for example, what's the regulation? What boxes do we need to tick? How do we do that? We don't have regulation in place for that. Essentially, they can do it where they want. They can do it how they want. And obviously, it's up to them to do that in a safe and acceptable manner. That's where that is at the minute. And obviously, regulation takes time to connect. Steve, to answer your wider point about what would we as the MCA do, we would be reacting the same as most parties in this room. I think we're here. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. We're here as you all are, trying to keep abreast of what's going on and trying to work out what the next 5 and 10 years looks like.
Yeah.
But the next 5 months could look very different.
And Jamie, we haven't got any better answers than you have. You know, even from an oil spill response point of view, if our members go down that route, what do we do? You know, and this is the bigger question, I think, to everybody is who drives this stuff? Where does it come from? Does it come from the insurance sector? I don't know. Does it come from salvage? I don't know. Does it come from industry? Does it come? Where does it come from? But ultimately, somebody's got to put their hat on the rack and say, it's us, haven't they?
Just to talk on the point there about the STS, it's very interesting that the LNG STS is now regulation within the UK for the LNG side. So that would tell me that the industry is driving the requirements for the SIL systems, for the compatibility, rather than the regulation. So this, as it was talked about at the beginning of your speech there, is industry going to drive the regulation? And on the STS side, currently with the MCA, on the LNG side, no LNG company would allow an STS without SIL system, without the RCs, without the hoses, without all the compatibility. So essentially, the industry are driving that requirement at the moment. Is that kind of what you're saying there with the regulations not following what industry are doing at the moment? Or maybe misrepresenting what you said there.
No, I don't think so. I think it'd be fair to say that the MCA and under Department of Transport are going to have to react to what are the demands of industry. I think it was Richard mentioned the range of alternative fuels that are being discussed. That's another one as well. You've also got the threat of one major incident could be a major setback for any one of these alternative fuels.
Oh, 100%.
Look at
100%.
was it electric buses in Paris? They were the forerunner. Few too many fires. There are no electric buses in Paris.
All changed back now. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's always been a thing with, obviously, if I just say off topic of LNG STS, is a new concept. The first incident that happened within LNG STS puts everything back so far. And it's the same with the alternative fuels. I mean, let's say the buses, and there's various different examples of this on the shore side and the marine side where you talk about the fuel there being invisible. And these things have happened. They're happening, and the reaction is post-incident. So are we trying to get to a pre-incident response and a pre-incident regulation design before we have a major incident that sets the industry back 10 years and the IMO regulations for 2050 become unrealistic because we've had a big incident that forces the change a different way, maybe.
Thanks, Rob.
Hi, morning. I'm Justina Lee from Shell. First of all, thank you, because everything you're saying is kind of vocalizing this grey sense of unease that we've got internally. So I'm just going to do a bit of sharing in the safe space here. Shell, we are looking at our decarbonisation risk in our fleet in maritime. You're probably engaged with Shell at different levels. In no particular order, our concerns are liquefied CO2, ammonia, methanol, and batteries. So those are the four faces that we're looking at. I know from speaking to my colleagues in BP, the same thing. Hydrogen pops in and out. Okay, so that's our risk that we're looking at. I support a marine technical function within Shell Shipping, and there's various work streams going on to look at the risks, the emergency response. And we are very much in the same thought line that we know it's coming, and oh my, we're pushing forward, but we are not prepared. Excellent point by Maria is, are we even engaging with the frontline people? And we're not. So hands up, we're not. So that needs to be rectified, and we can do that. But just interestingly, to reflect upon our conversation just now, a couple of weeks ago, Shell did one of our big regional exercises, and the scenario was an HNS shipping incident, Straits of Dover. It was raw palm oil, it was benzene, and it was neodyne 1418, which is an olefin. This is a genuine, realistic scenario that could happen. MCA were there, all the regulators were there. It was a big one, 150 people. I mean, it was good, it was great, good exercise. But the overwhelming understanding is that we are not as prepared as we need to be. And again, there's a lot of things that are going to be reactive. So we appreciate we need to get one step ahead of this. And this is an industry thing. We can't do it on our own. None of us can do it on our own. There is appetite there. We do have very technical people working on it, as do BP, Exxon. I think we're missing the piece of we need to pull together. Within that, hopefully we can decide who leads who. But I think we just need to come together in the same room. And I know that you guys speak to different people in Shell. So you're probably having these conversations that I'm unaware of, but it's that communication piece which is going to be vital. So that was just my comments and observations. I would love to be involved in a body, a party, a platform. Great, we all want to be. My only request is, if that's the way we're going to go, it has to be targeted and effective, because we sit on so many forums. They're wonderful, but it needs to be speedy. It needs to be proactive. We need to get stuff done now. So that's my only request. Thank you.
Absolutely, Justine. Thank you. And just to answer your question on that, I mean, I've watched multiple webinars where I watched one just the other day where Shell at London International Shipping Week, and the chap Steve, someone from Shell, was going towards hydrogen, for example. So there's loads of people out there having loads of conversations, as you say. But is it all those conversations in the secluded little rooms that won't share that information because it's either commercially sensitive or not? So is there now time for the big players to start coming together? There was a quote the other day, for the greener good, you know, and is it time for that to happen? And if so, how is that driven forward? Is it driven forward by you guys, or is it somebody else, the insurers, ITAC, Salvors, who the front line, who actually drives that forward?
So I think the reality is there will be commercial sensitivity, and you can't get around that. But I do think that because we can operate under the banner of emergency response and preparedness, that does give us an opportunity where we can meet, even if it's in a more informal setting, but actually there would be an opportunity to share more information if it remains under the banner of emergency response and preparedness.
Yeah.
But I will tell you now that Shell Legal, as would all the other major legals, would want to be involved, as they all need to be. So there will be that fine line we need to consider.
Yeah. Can I react to that one?
Of course.
Because I think that's where it also combines with the question earlier on about data, right? Having data of incidents and everything with it. From a salvage perspective, for us, it's so key to have more data, right? To know how a fuel reacts based on certain scenarios that we see, right? And that's, if you look at conventional crude or normal fuel systems, that's based off years of incidents, right? Yeah, sorry to say it like that. All the equipment, all the know-how, all the solutions, hot tapping a double hull, getting the fuel out, etc. That's all based on years and years of incidents and preparing and utilizing it. Right now, what we see a lot is that we have ideas. Other responders have great ideas, but there's just no track record, obviously, because it doesn't exist or it's implemented. Even if you look at LNG as a cargo and as a fuel, there's zero or very limited incidents till now, and therefore you don't have experience and you cannot. Not good on that one, but so that's where the knowledge sharing and getting that data from bigger companies or like Shell or others is so crucial for us to get a feel of what are we having in front of us, besides what we think is important and what we think is in need. So yeah, I agree.
So just to that point, can I ask both Maria and Justina, do you collaborate with your salvors, with your insurers? Do you talk with those guys about what bad looks like? Is there already conversations going on in the background that maybe could come together as a bigger conversation?
So I don't know the answer to that question because I don't. However, I know that my colleagues do. So it's just, the different departments in a massive organization.
Yeah.
I know that they speak to them because the shipping fleet is well established, and I know that they've got the relationships with the salvors, the P&I clubs. But that's the missing bit, right? The emergency response side of it isn't necessarily as involved in those conversations. We might not have needed to be yet, or maybe this is the time to come in, but that is the link now that needs to be made. And just quickly onto the request for data. This is a simple thing like our exercise. We did visual shaky jar to show that the olefin on top of palm oil, you can't see it. So you can see the palm oil, can't see it. It's a clear liquid, can't see it. So how are you meant to respond to that? You can't see it. How are you meant to remote sense it? How are we going to handle the wildlife, the birds, if they're covered in it? We also did lab tests on it just to see how much the benzene would stick to the stuff. And the lab test showed that actually benzene would be a lot more persistent than we thought it'd be under lab conditions, right? So we take all of this in the sense that it's lab. But this is the stuff that we can share with you, because even if you just have it somewhere on maybe this incident will happen ever, but this is the data, that's cool. So, but again, to make this a more recognized process to do it.
Maria.
I was just going to say that, and from a Chevron perspective, I don't think we do that much on the shipping side. I know we charter, but I think it's fairly small. And I think there's a thought that industry has huge amount of shipping, but I think it's greatly reduced from what it used to be. So I don't know if we're really, really the major players. I know obviously for shipping oil and gas, yes. But for other things, I don't think we are. And I know people look to us, but and that's and that we've got to be very careful with that. We charter a lot, and there's a lot of other organizations there. So I just want to share that. So from an IPECA perspective and the marine spill group, are there things we can do? Yes, but are we really driving shipping energy and the future of that? And you guys might turn around and say, yeah, you are. But, and this is what I don't think we have full awareness here. It's like what Daisy was saying, we don't really have a lot of information, so it's very difficult to have informed discussions, I think, in this space.
Thank you. Justina, do you want to go and then we'll come to Rob? Thank you.
You're in charge, I think.
Just to add to that, the Shell's shipping fleet is massively reduced.
Yeah.
And I couldn't tell you if it's going to get bigger, but we do time charter, we charter a lot of stuff. So that's a really good point by Maria. And I'd say another thing that we're sort of concerned about is the shore-based side of stuff as well. So great that we can carry all this stuff, but what happens when we put it to shore and the risk there? Again, we are starting to look at this, and that actually negates some of the journeys that we're making into the future fuels because the shore's just not ready for it yet. Yeah. So that in itself might drive the direction of it. So yeah, just to say, I agree with Mo.
Rob, in the front, please.
James, Leviathan Instant Management. Yeah, I think if we look at history of regulation and legislation, it tends to be framed, as Hazel said, sadly, around when there's instance. And the way it gets framed is if we have a bunch of responsible companies that have already established good practice, then the regulation is framed around the existing good practice from the good guys in industry. If there are not a bunch of good guys in industry who have framed good practice already, then the politicians are in charge of how the regulation gets framed, and that's not a good place to be. So it's just an observation that soon and very soon, we do need to formulate some good practice amongst ourselves, because otherwise, inevitably, sadly, there will be an instance somewhere, and we don't want to be on the receiving end of bad regulation.
So, Rob, just on that, who starts that? It's back to who drives.
So yeah, who's going to be
and
who's going to be most impacted, and we can all say it won't be us, but actually it will be us. So I think we do need to take care. Whether we're running a fleet or whether we just have an interest in a cargo, it has the risk of coming back to anyone in this room, and so. It's finding the right forum, isn't it? What's the forum that's going to work best? And it might even require a new forum, because it may be that the current fora that there are internationally don't actually, any of them quite cover the range of people that you need. So it might need a new forum. I think we need to be prepared to think about that.
Thanks, Rob.
And just before Brian steps in, I take the point about, we're crisis oriented. It takes an incident to happen before we really get galvanized. And, I look at my own organization and how did we come about? And we talked about the slowness of regulation or conventions coming through IMO. And so, ITAC came about through a voluntary scheme, and it's a voluntary code through industry, first and foremost. There are lots of different bodies going on. We're talking to P&I clubs, we're talking with IPECA, the Marine Spill Group, bringing that forum together, because we're not necessarily chatting to one another in a forum with salvos. And it's not just the big energy companies. Obviously, there's huge shipping fleets out there, the Maersks, the Stoltz, the AP Mollers, what have you. And we're feeding into that with the response side, so understanding the fate behavior and the effects side, but there's that other little bit in the middle, that all important salvage and stemming the source side. Brian.
One of the things I noticed is there's an awful lot of acronyms and floating around, and this conference is called ITAC, which is Industry Technical Advisory Conference. It doesn't actually say anything about oil spills. And I think it would be very interesting to invite people from, let's say, emergency services, firefighters trained to fight propane fires, LNG fires. Places, the different fire schools do this. Every airport firefighter trains on fighting propane fires because propane is the fuel on aircraft. So all the firefighting props that they use are fired by propane. But also, of course, hydrogen fuel is used extensively nowadays by NASA, by Airbus with Ariane. So these are people who use hydrogen. They know the risks of it. They must have emergency response people for hydrogen. Why don't we invite them along to this committee and say, what would you do if it's you get suddenly a hydrogen leak at Kourou, for example? Well, these people are probably trained for it.
I mean, taking your point there, and apologies, I forgot your name there. But Justine, taking your point as well, Justine as well. Yeah, Bob, Justine, it's fine. And also the point on the back there as well. We're talking about I think we're talking a little bit about the response to an incident right now. And as you said, sharing the information between the BPs, the Shells, the AP Mullers, the bigger groups of people, we're all driving towards the same target. Yes, commercial sensitivity, and if you can do it slightly better than Shell and BP can do it slightly better than Chevron or whatever, you might make a few more pounds on the dollar. That's understandable, but the ultimate aim of this is to get fuel on board the ship and get it to A to B safely. Yeah. And then if there's something does happen, have an industry-driven response. And he said there's other industries outside the marine industry, SpaceX, NASA, all these things that have already using this fuel, bringing them to the forum and creating an industry-driven one. I look back to SGMF, for example, the marine fueling industry. Looking back now, you've got various different providers of connection and couplings for bunkering. So the standardization of even the coupling to get the fuel onto the ship is still not there. So getting the standardization off the ship in an instant response is not there. So yes, there's legal sensitivities with the various different companies, but ultimately the industry as a whole, as a maritime industry, is driving towards the same target of carbon neutrality and using ammonia, using hydrogen, using methanol as a fuel, and getting the industry together is, how do you do that? How do you make that happen? It's okay sitting here, one of us saying, I think it's a fantastic idea, let's do it. How do you get the right people in the room, and how do you bring the expertise from the fire services, from NASA, the services from SpaceX, the various different companies that use this fuels already, to bring that knowledge to our group? And we sit here as myself as an engineer, looking and going, I think this works this way. You've got people with the knowledge out there who could bring that knowledge to a forum, and how do you create that forum to have that shared knowledge and from beginning to end?
I mean, I think I've just had that moment of, oh wow. I mean, look how much preparation we have for hydrocarbons, oil spills. The reality is we need this now for future fuels, right? So we need the ITACs, the interspills, the IOs, whatever we're going to call them. We need these forums. And so I think we have to step it up. This is a major step change, and it needs to be unified. So this is, yes, let's get the firefighters in, let's get the salvors in, let's get the amber pars in. But it needs to be a really big scale.
Yeah. You see, the forum, one of the things I found with forums sometimes is we can sit here, have a lovely conversation and leave you all feeling all fuzzy and warm that we've had a decision, but how do you get that to be ratified into some kind of legislation, regulation? How do you move that forward from the experts in the room as such talking about it to have some legislative documentation that's there? I don't know the answer to that question, unfortunately, but it's how do you make that next step from saying, do you know what, we've got a problem, we all accept in this room, there's an issue, glaring into the face, there's experts in other fields that we could use, these big shipping companies, your Shells, your Chevrons, your AP Mullers, all these, the MCA as an authority, how do we drag all that together to then not let the politicians drive a document that doesn't quite fit the subject? How do we change that? And unfortunately, if I had the answer to that, I think I'd be a lot richer than I am right now. But how do we make that answer, and how do we drive that forward? And like I say, for me, looking from my background with LNG, we still don't have a one-stop solution for how we get the fuel on the ship. So now we're talking, as we mentioned earlier, the various different EVs, all different fuels. How do you then have a one-stop solution to get all the fuel off? You can't get it all in one way. So how does the industry start from the point of getting it on board to, in a salvage situation, in an instant response, getting it off the vessel as well?
Beginning, end, middle.
Yes, it's the whole bit, the whole chain
Yeah,
needs to be looked at. And I say, looking, as I said to you, Steve, when you first asked me to come sit on this panel, my concern about the future fuels is still the legacy concern of LNG fuels.
Absolutely.
The concern's still there. So what happened, we're using LNG now as a fuel quite regularly. How do you respond to that? And a lot of ship owners turn around and say, we phone these guys, and then someone phones someone else, and so until someone finds the answer. And if we can get in front of that bus now and slow it down and stop that, get a response right now, that's a good way of looking at the future fuels. And hopefully LNG will fall on that ban at some point as well. And we
So
can
just to add to Adam's point, that with the exception of Qatar Gas,
yes, right.
there is no other business globally that has a guaranteed response to LNG. None. It all works on best endeavours. All of you, Shell, Exxon, everybody works on best endeavours. So we haven't even solved that problem, and now here we are trying to talk and solve about these problems. So it's a bit of history that needs to sort of work forward. Thank you.
Yeah, how you doing? I'm Mike Troom with Occidental Petroleum. It's kind of interesting listening to the discussion, and I think it's great that you all take an initiative to bring this topic up. And it's kind of, I want to say, a boiling pot over a while. And I kind of look at the evolution over the last 30 or 40 years. You look at fuels. I mean, nuclear's always been out there, but it's been one separate group outside the OSROs, or the Oil Spill Response Organizations, looking at it. So that kind of gives you a data point. But, you know, over the 40 years, I remember it was bunker C number 6 and number 2 diesel focus on. You know, then we've evolved looking at LNG on there. Then you've looked at, you know, biofuels. The gentleman brought up about, you know, the methanol and everything. And essentially today, it kind of almost get to two folds. It's one, it's looking at the experience that are trying to attack those issues. And it's not just obviously in this room, we're recognizing other groups like the first responders as one example, but it's also the experience of the people that have been able to respond to those spills. I mean, a lot of it, looking in the year, you know, I've got a lot of great friends over the years with Exxon that have left the companies. You know, a lot of people have had that experience left there. And to me, there's also a gap of people just to have the experience to understand and appreciate the response on it and retain that for one. And that's just of what we're looking at there. It does include some of the other ones like nuclear, LNG, and other things that we responded to. Biofuels is on the future, and it only becomes a solution is when they're unfortunate, like how we experienced NERDLs. Nobody thought of NERDLs until there was a response. Then we're on the reactive part of it. So part of it, I think, going future is you almost have to look at, and I'm just looking at your wheel with the topics on there. You almost have to get other groups together outside, and maybe people representing the first responders that are responding to hydrogen and other fuels, and get all those groups in the room in order to collaborate, to talk about it, to coordinate it. Because right here, we can't solve it. I mean, I look as an operator, I look as an OSRO, we're managing our risk. We're driven by, unfortunately, either best practices in industry or regulations driving. Rather than let the regulations drive it, you know, be proactive is getting everybody together that owns a piece of the pie rather than trying to put our arms around it, because we own part of it, but not all of it. And it's also getting that expertise in that other areas, so we're not trying to reinvent the wheel on there. That's just kind of my thoughts. So,
Thank you.
And can I, you know, because we're noting the big issue that we've got here and the challenge ahead of us, can I just throw it out there with these alternative fuels? You know, we have the incident, we have that acute incident, you know, human life is at risk. We've got the salvors trying to lighter it. You mentioned OSROs. Monitor and evaluate, obviously, you know, check the trajectory for what's going on with these things. Can we respond? I mean, they're very volatile, they're evaporating, dissipating, you know, they're missable. You know, what can we do? What do we do, you know, with cargo spills of this nature at the moment?
I've got one here.
Thank you, Rob.
Then Mark, then Paul.
Hi, Neil Plater, Vicoma. So we're an equipment manufacturer. Seems to me that to get stuff done, one of the drivers is going to have to be money. And I was just Googling and looking at plimsoll lines and the role of, and as Mark mentioned, classification societies in ship safety in the 1800s. but also I'm thinking that it really needs to be joined up. So if you've got classification societies setting standards and then insurance requiring that, and also the role of the MCA, qualifying a ship to enter a port. But all of this stuff costs money, and unless it's joined up, it's not going to happen. So Shell, very, very good record, ship safety, but for a Shell trader, it is more expensive to move a cargo with a Shell ship than it is with another ship. So I think the quick answer is money. But I think there's a role, classification societies, insurers, the MCA, and the other thing that occurs to me, having as an equipment manufacturer, we see a lot of tenders, and the standard of the tenders and the technical require. When I retire, I'm going to offer my services out writing tenders, and I think that unless competent bodies can get in there and do something proactively to fill that void with sensible, practical, and cost-effective, cost comes into this, unless they fill that void with sensible stuff, it's going to end up not being sensible. And
You're absolutely right, Neil. And just playing back to Ritta's part there about response readiness, were you part of anything for IMO 2020? Does your equipment work efficiently, effectively on low sulfur, ultra low sulfur fuels? Was there any consultation done prior back then to those coming in, and where you sat within as a manufacturer, where you sat within that whole piece?
No, and I was asked yesterday, I think, what are you doing about nurdles? Well, unfortunately, as a manufacturer, we have to make money, and I would love to do stuff for nurdles, and we've got technology that immediately I think, oh, we could do that better. There isn't the money in it,
no,
because that's down to local authorities, and we need that money to survive. It's not being greedy. Our business is making equipment. Money's what will drive it.
Okay, thank you.
Steve, can I just put one thing in before talking about classification, right? Because I think that's it was already raised twice, and we're facing a similar topic, right? Is that if you look at the basic side of things, is that you have a ship owner, let's call it Maersk or CMA or whoever it is, they have a plan, right? They want those new fuels in because their client is asking for it. They design a ship, partly they involve eventually a classification, and the classification approves it. So the ship is ready to go. Yeah, that's it. We've had these discussions also with ship owners that voluntarily came to us and said, I want you to look at it from a salvage perspective. Is this ship salvage ready? In this case, it was an LNG propulsed vessel. We went for the drawings. It was still at the drawing board phase. And we actually found out that you can put LNG in the ship. This is a cruise vessel with 5,000, 7,000, 8,000 people on board. You put LNG in it, but you can only get LNG out the moment by venting. So actually by using it or venting it out. Venting it out would take 2 months or so. And if you're in casualty, you want to get that LNG out as fast as possible, within hours instead of months. So we, of course, had a discussion with the classification about you did all the hazards, HAZOPs, everything with it, QRAs, everything with it. How far does that go? So how far are you taking this? And actually the conclusion is we are only applying it for normal operation. They're not applying it for salvage. So actually ships are approved, are ready to go, and there's no real incident scenario. They're looking at normal operations with light incidents, so to say. And I think that's where, talking about stakeholders, where things go a little bit out of shape. So of course there are drivers to get these ships on the water and get them ready. However, the approval part, whereby insurer of course approves on an insurance, of course, to is actually has limitations.
Yeah.
And that's where a big flaw comes into play, is that, yeah, if you really want to be prepared, you have to go the full scheme. And it's purely voluntary that a SharePoint for himself says, hang on, I need to do more than what the regulation or what the classification is saying. Because again, that's also commercially driven to please the client to get the ship classified.
So back to response starts on the drawing board.
Yeah.
Pretty much. Rob, Mark.
Just going back to some lessons that we've learned on the inland response side. So the Emerging and Future Risk Working Group was formed because of the M25 being closed for virtually for 18 hours because of a whole car carrier caught fire. One electric car caught fire, and then the rest of the cars caught fire. A number of fires which occurred in recycling centres when lithium-ion batteries were being just basically spontaneously caught fire, and 5 deaths caused by people charging their scooters in their flats. I mean, the plug that they used was by the door because that was convenient because the lift was just across the corridor. But unfortunately, they caught fire, and then 5 people have died. So that was the catalyst for forming the group. And the idea was that the group would with all stakeholders. So we have Energy Power Networks, we have all the regulators, we have UK Public Health Agency in the group. So we brought all the stakeholders together with the National Fire Chief Council, so that we will agree what the response plan will be with the people who are the responders. And the first responders in this country are the fire service, followed by members of our association. So what we've done is we've agreed up front what were the principles of what we will do in certain circumstances. So we have a set of principles, and we say those are the principles. We then, from that, we've then written response plans, quite detailed response plans of who will do what and who takes responsibility for what in the different instances that occur. Obviously, with the goal of protecting life, and protecting the environment is written into the plans. But they're now agreed across the nation. So we know what we're going to do when we go and do it. But what we're doing is when we attend an incident, that we then review the incident and say, what was the learning? So, for example, there was a very large fire at an airport in one of the parking lots so adjacent to the airport last week at Luton Airport, and it closed the airport for several days. The cause of the fire is yet to be investigated, but the initial cause was thought it must be electric vehicle. It wasn't an electric vehicle, it was a diesel vehicle. Was it a fault, or was it vandalism? Well, it might actually have been vandalism, but the consequence of the fire was, because of the mix of risks within the fire, which included a lot of battery cars, it was impossible for the firefighters to fight the fire because of the unknown risks which were presented. And whilst the public didn't like it, and I'm sure the car owners didn't like it, when they put firefighters in initially at the ground floor, they were dealing with, and the fire wasn't on the ground floor, but what was happening above them was effectively you were getting a vapor cloud release from the lithium-ion batteries which are on fire, and that was causing jets of flame to go beyond the perimeter of. So it was the right tactical decision to protect life. But what it has shown is just the potential for these multi-fuel risks to be dealt with by the regulators.
Sure.
But all I would say, the point really, is that by getting all stakeholders together in one room and agreeing principles, and then enacting on those principles, and then having a learning loop from each incident, you can make progress, but you have to collaborate.
So Mark,
and it is possible.
Yeah, so that's a very good point. And Daisy, does that all these conversations, is that something that can feed into your working group? And is it something that you think the international group, as the insurers of 90% of the world's fleet, do you think it's something that they could drive?
I think they do. I just think the way that everyone hears about it is probably a bit different, or may not be aware of it, because effectively, and we've talked a lot here about, well, change is only going to happen when there probably is a major incident. Whenever incidents happen within the 12 group clubs, there are very good means in place for sharing information and lessons learned. Each of those clubs have quite substantial loss prevention departments with in-house technical expertise around these incidents, and guidance is produced. We also work with ITAC, and a good example of this actually is the stuff we talked about earlier in plastic pellets. The group has had a number of what we call pool claims. So this is where we share reinsurance, and this is where the money factor comes in. As soon as you start to have very substantial claims and the reinsurance and the insurance cost goes up, obviously it's in our interest and our members' interest for us to look, well, how can we prevent this happening? And as a consequence, there is a very, very helpful guide that's been produced in relation to plastic pellets, which is now actually also being reviewed by the IMO and hopefully will come through in a more formal regulatory sense as well. So it does happen. I think the bit for me that's interesting today is that engagement probably with the salvage sector in particular. The international group does have a salvage committee as well. So there is engagement there. I'm not sure how much there has been in relation to alternative fuels yet. And it's certainly something I will take back to that. So I think we do have quite a unique ability to potentially join up the various different threads of this and communicate that message out. Obviously, we don't cover the entire global fleet, but at least it would make some change. And I think that we have the ability to probably do that more quickly than understandably states probably do, you know, at IMO level and stuff like that, because it takes time to get consensus on these things.
And ultimately, the dollar's going to stop with you guys anyway.
Yeah, precisely.
So
I mean,
it's in your interest.
You've got to go up to 3.1 billion to hit it, but you know, like with some of these incidents, you know, and the unique nature of them, I was sitting here thinking, well, the wreck removal cost for us is probably going to be substantially more when you're looking at an alternative fuel, especially if you've got to wait for a vessel to be vented for 2 months, having salvors on standby. The cost of that are going to be substantial. So it is in the insurer's interest as well to work with the industry, others in the industry, and make sure that those costs are reduced.
Absolutely. Thank you, Daisy. Rob?
Yeah, I'd just like to throw a little historical perspective on this. Oh, Paul Schuler, OSRL, formerly Clean Caribbean. First of all, going back to the late 90s or early 2000s, a couple of companies that were in Clean Caribbean who have major headquarters in this country asked about the ability to respond to LNG. So just to take a little slice of LNG here, we weren't talking about LNG as a fuel, but LNG as cargo, which meant acquiring and maintaining such things as cryogenic hoses, Yokohama fenders, and with the Osros perhaps acquiring these and maintaining them, and with the logistic infrastructure that they had, you know, it seemed like a good place. But the other members said, well, we're not in that business, so we're not that interested. And it actually was first put up in about 97 and another time about 7 or 8 years later, and that's where it ended. To bring it more to today, OSRL has working groups on HNS, HNS, on LNG to look at what is our response capability. But again, for LNG, I think we're looking more as a cargo rather than a fuel. The question really is, are we going to be an all hazards organization, OSRO? And there's been discussion about that in the last few years, and where that goes is still unclear, because a lot of the expertise, frankly, lies outside of OSRL into these service companies, response organizations, salvers, and whatnot. So, you know, I think to bring it back to focus a little bit, I'm not speaking about some of the other fuel types, alternative fuels, but it's a little bit bigger than just alternative fuels. It's about HNS, it's about LNG as cargo, and you know, it's really still trying to find whose place is where on the map.
Yeah.
I'm not sure we'll solve it here, but it's being looked at, and there have been several iterations of it already. So, I think we also need to think in terms of, are we looking at a controlled incident where versus like one that would require venting versus transfer of cargo? I don't have the answer, but there is some history to this, and the history has led to the formation in OSRL of some working groups and to work with other agencies and other institutions to try to decide where the different lines are drawn.
Yeah.
And who should do what, and where does one end and another begin.
For sure. And just to add to your point, Paul, that LNG emergency ship-to-ship stuff that we were working on some 3 years ago with STS Marine Solutions and Blue Tac, we put it to industry, we put it to our members, and it was received warmish, but not that warm. So that's back on the drawing board now, and we're revamping it, which will go out, we're hoping, within the next period of time. But there's definitely a need for it. It's there, but it's just back to the cost element, dare we say, that holds it all up and pushes it in a different direction. Rob.
Maria had.
So I've been enjoying the conversations that we've been having. And I've just been talking with Holly here about Polly. I work with someone in shipping called Holly, Polly, and about what we can do. And I think so. We have a meeting coming up next year for IPICA in April. But what we're going to try and see if we can do is put on a bit of a workshop, perhaps, in this space. To look at alternative fuel response and H&S, and try to have some working groups together to look at things like, what's the response capability we have, what training and equipment might we need for the different things we might be looking at, would we be looking at things, examining things like containment and recovery, shoreline cleanup, waste management, wildlife impacts, health and safety for each of these particular things, and try and actually identify what the gaps are, what the needs are, and just kind of start that conversation going. The challenge is having the right people. And also, first of all, we have to see if we have availability and approval as well from IPICA. But that is something that we will try and work towards based on the conversation we're having here. So when we get that out, we will give that to Rob and see if we can attract people, if we can get approval for that. Thank you.
Fantastic, Maria. Thank you for that. And I think with Justina's comments and Daisy's comments as well, I think from my perspective, there's actually movement from today, which is what we kind of set out to do, was to stimulate that discussion about what's not there, not what is there. So thank you for the panel. Really appreciate you spending the time to come across and come down. Thank you for that. And thank you all to the audience. Thank you. Rob, tea and coffee is
Yeah,
out there.
Do first.
Can I make one small an intervention on that discussion? Just a short one. We'll be short of time. I thought we were. Are we?
No, we've got plenty of time.
You're all right. I just wondered, I was hanging back, but it just follows up on Maria's comment. Peter Taylor, in this affiliation wearing a kind of GI, IPICA, IMO hat. And it seems to me, and likewise, listening to the discussion, very interested. And I was thinking about responsibilities and preparedness and the IMO and the OPRC HNS protocol, which is the international instrument for preparedness for HNS incidents. And then I was thinking about the forum, the R&D forums that were held, driven by the OPRC convention, not the OPRC HNS protocol, probably more than 20 years ago. The last one, I think, ironically, was on HFO. if I remember right, maybe 2001. Yeah, and that brings all the acronyms together. Everyone is, maybe not NASA and SpaceX, but we've got good representation in this room, but I can think of 20 other acronyms who have legitimate interest in this issue. And they're all, well, of course, the regulators are members of IMO, all these acronyms are observer organisations at IMO. So that's a conduit into developing a forum. It might be pie in the sky. I checked the OPRC HNS protocol. It does have a mandate, just like the OPRC convention, for IMO to facilitate, I forget the words, but to bring together people for technical exchange on R&D. So there may be, and maybe it's through IPEC's connection to the IMO. It would be a big deal, I guess, very expensive for IMO to have, let's have an R&D forum on these issues, maybe. But there is a hook, unless I misunderstand that things like methanol and LNG cannot be covered by HNS protocol. I don't know.
But isn't that almost the IMO's responsibility to do that? Bearing in mind that they're setting the target date, shouldn't they be part of this whole thing that says, you know what, there's not anything in place, let's put something in place to support that?
Just to clarify, HNS does cover these as cargo. It's only when they're like as bunkers. So under the Bunkers Convention, that's mineral hydrocarbon oil. So it wouldn't cover it if vessels are propelled by it. But HNS does cover it as cargo. It's just obviously that's not enforced yet. So
sorry, the sorry, can you
protocol.
I'm talking about the protocol.
So that's a guidance on planning for and responding to HNS spills. So something's happening, that's in the NEPC space, not the Environmental Protection Committee, not the Safety Committee. But IMO there is that awareness. Probably more can be done.
Perfect. Thank you all. Well, there's one more.
Just a final word, perhaps, because this move to low sulfur fuels will have effect on the greenhouse effect. And the prediction is it will increase the greenhouse effect by 10% because there's no more sulfates in the stratosphere because of the shipping. So the people say that even this hot summer is due to lack of pollution. So I'm not sure what the technical input into the IMO was about that. But
That can't be the last note, surely.
No, the last note. Thanks, Steve, for putting this session together with the panel as well. So, round of applause for Steve. Okay, you don't get your lunch just yet. It's not ready yet. Inesh would like a group photo. We're going to do it in here because I don't want anyone leaving those doors because I've got things to say. So, Inesh, do you want everyone at the front here?
I think so. Yeah, I guess.
Will it work?
Yeah, I just feel like there's so bad. But yeah, I'll open the blinds. Yeah.
I can switch these off.
Please.
Yeah. So if everybody can come to the front, we might need to move these these chairs. These chairs are there. I'll let Inesh walk you around.
Sorry, a little bit.
Yeah, sure. There's one. Okay, tall people at the back.
Pointless me being at the back.
Dave's tall. Use him as a measuring stick. Tall people at the back. Usual thing. Yeah, we're in the middle somewhere. Right, keep coming. Where's Inesh? Ah, there she is. Get close, get close.
I'll look over Andy's shoulder. You to direct people. I'll slide them over.
How's that look? Is that okay?
Okay, that corner over there. Can you squeeze it a bit? Yeah.
Okay,
just-
closer.
Yeah.
And is someone going to put their hands out? Am I going to be blind?
Just fill out the flight plan, don't worry.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Nothing breakable in there.
Clear the mug in the glass.
Yeah, the gin and tonic. Gin and tonic glass.
Unfortunately, it wasn't gin and tonic, it was just water. Leave it too early for an old tea bearer.
That's great.
12 o'clock
Great
today.
observation.
Oh my God. Hey guys, big smile. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, that's the group photo. Nobody's to leave, Maria. Come back. Please come back. Please come back. Nobody's to leave. I promise it's 2 minutes. There's no tea out there for you anyway. Right. Okay. So. Yeah. Okay, so just want to say thank you to the NOC events team. They're not here in the room, but they've been fantastic in organising everything behind the scenes, the catering and everything. Thanks to the NOC IT guys. I've been their apprentice for the last 3 days, so yeah, I know what I'm going to do later on. I'm going to get experts on this. Thanks to my colleagues, especially Inesh and Melissa from the marketing and communications team for helping out on this. And yeah, but thanks to you, the audience, for making the trip here to Southampton. Again, I think Scott wins the prize for most travelled person all the way from New Zealand. And yeah, thanks for that. So it only leaves me now to hand over to Paul Schuler. So it's Paul is between you and lunch, which will be served outside. And after lunch, you are free to go or free to stay here and work and do whatever you want to do. But I'm just going to hand over to Paul. So I'll set up this for you, Paul, while you just.
It's a hazardous fuel.
Okay, this will be a rather short presentation and no questions at the end. I just wanted you to know that it was mentioned earlier, ITAC has been around since the early 90s. It had a kind of a different flavor, a different form as we've gone along. The big change in ITAC took place with Deepwater Horizon, and afterwards there was more or less a reformulation, and we mentioned that was under the shepherdness of Andy Nicol, who kind of brought us from where we were before, a little cautiously, the first few post Deepwater Horizon ITACs, and then more to what we are now. And every ITAC's different. It's different because of the issues that are out there. It's a little bit different based on where it's going to happen and what the local issues are. It's different based on what kind of operations are predominant in the industry and what kind of questions therefore come up and what categories of and topics we have and who's going to speak and all that sort of thing. So it's never quite the same. And where we are today with this ITAC is a kind of a result of where we've been the last 5 or 10 ITACs. So my job at the end here is simply to say that in next year, about this time, we're going to have the ITAC 2024 in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. We're planning that for the first or second week of November. I'm actually moving towards the second week, which takes us out of the hurricane season just one more week. So that's the plan. The venue host will be Nova Southeastern University, Oceanographic Center, and the National Coral Reef Institute. It's a wonderful place to be. One of the issues of timing was we had to deconflict with Clean Gulf, which I think that next year will be in New Orleans. And then we come right up against the Thanksgiving holiday at the end of November for the US. And for some people might want to say, well, jam it right up against it and I'll stay and go to the Bahamas. And others will say, give me time to get home and have Thanksgiving at home. So we're figuring that out right now. But Fort Lauderdale's a great place to be in November. The weather's wonderful. Probably, November, December, January, February, March are good times to be there. And otherwise, it's hot. So we'll look forward to seeing most of you in Fort Lauderdale. And there'll be communications far in advance in terms of what the program will be, what our focus will be, what hotels and what to do, and how to have fun if you're going to stay longer. So November 2024. That's our next get together.
All right.
Okay,
Thanks, Paul.
that's all I have. Thank
Right.
you.
Yeah, great. Absolutely. And so the baton hands to Paul for next year. So I've done my bit. So as they do on TV, drop the mic.